Hi there, this is Nicole from Right at Home, and I'm so excited to be joining Stamp and Scrapbook Expo for one of their at-home events. Today I'm going to be sharing a few techniques for using stencils while showcasing Right at Home's newest stencil designs. If you're interested in these stencils or any other products in the Right at Home shop, you can take 25% off with the code SSE25, which I will make sure to put in the description box below. Let's get started. So the first stenciling technique I'll be showing you is how to incorporate foiling. To start though, we'll need to ink our background with color, and we'll be doing so using the Kaleidoscope stencil set. This stencil set is 6 by 6 inches and has 5 pieces that layer together to create a mesmerizing colorful background. I'll start by temporarily adhering a piece of 6 by 6 white cardstock to a scrap piece of paper. Then I'll place the first layer of the set on top and hold it in place with a piece of our ink blending washi tape. Each of our stencils has an etching with a number in the bottom corner so you know which layer it is, as well as an etching of the word top on the top of the stencil so you know which way is up. For my first color here, I'm going in with Hero Art's Mint Julep. I'm going for a wintry snowflake color scheme here, so I'll be using various shades of blue, which will pair well with the silver foil I'll be using later. So you'll just ink on that color with a blending brush or a foam tool, and once you're done, you can lift off the stencil and see that first layer of color. On the second layer of the stencil, you'll notice that there are additional etchings that you'll want to use to help you line up the stencil perfectly. These pieces, like the little star shape in the center there, line up with what you have already inked on your paper with the first stencil layer. So you'll just line that up and look around the stencil at the other etchings to make sure those match up as well, and then you can washi tape the stencil down and go in with your second color. Here I'm using Tide Pool by Hero Arts. For the third layer, I'm using Peacock Feathers by Ranger. So basically I'm going from the lightest color with the first layer, and then now that I'm on the third layer, I'm using my darkest color. For the fourth layer, I went back to Tide Pool, which is my medium shade, and for the final layer here, I'm using my lightest color, Mint Julep. And here you can see what the final background looks like and how all those pieces fit together to create such a beautiful, intricate background. Okay, so now we can move on to the foiling. So I'm going to place my background back down onto my scrap paper and tape the first stencil in the set on top. Then I'm going in with just some gloss gel medium that's used in mixed media projects and stenciling that over the top of those openings. This is what will allow us to foil this layer because the foil will stick to this gel once it's completely dry. If you have a gel that is made specifically for foiling, you can use that as well, but I only had the gel medium on hand, so I just decided to use that instead. So you'll just add a thin coat over top and set that aside for about an hour to dry. Once that's dry, I'm placing a piece of silver foil on top. This one has a bit of a pattern to it, which is fun, and I'll just sandwich that between 2 sheets of printer paper and run it through my laminator on the highest setting. Then you can peel off that foil and you'll see the awesome results. I was so excited when peeling this off, and just look at all that shine. So to put this background to use, I thought I'd create a birthday card that could be sent to someone with a winter birthday. I'm going to use our Script Greetings stamp and die set to create my sentiment. The die set has this outer shadow piece that coordinates with both the stamp in the set and also the inner word die. I decided to stamp the word celebrate today, but I'll be showing you how to use the inner die pieces later in the video. So I just stamped that onto the shadow piece, and I'll be popping that up in the center of the card using some foam tape. To add even more shine, I'm using some sequins here to scatter around the sentiment, and the card is finished. I love this foiling technique because it just gives you another way to use your stencils, and this design also works really well for masculine cards. I wanted to show you another panel that I inked up using this same stencil set, but for this one I used a different ink color for each layer, so 5 colors total. I used Hero Art's Bubblegum, Pale Tomato, Butter Bar, and Mint Julep in Tide Pool again to create this bright and colorful background. When you use a different color for each layer, it really brings the kaleidoscope effect to life. For my second stenciling technique, I'm going to use this panel and some glitter paste to show how you can add texture to your stenciled backgrounds. Here I'm using some glitter glitz paste and just applying a layer over the top. And when you peel off that stencil, you can see how just that simple touch really elevates the background. So I wanted to show you some other card samples made using this stencil set. This one actually uses the same color palette as our first example, but I added the glitter glitz paste instead of foil. I finished off the card with a scalloped circle in the center with a sentiment and some florals and a butterfly from one of the stamps in our collection. On this card I also was going for a wintry feel, but this time I went back over each layer of color with a layer of Versamark ink and then added glitter embossing powder over top and heated it until it melted. This last background is one of my favorites that I created with the stencil, and you'll notice it has color that radiates around the panel in a circular fashion as opposed to each layer being one color. I'll put a link in the description for the video on our YouTube channel showing you how to achieve this look. You'll notice on this panel I also used the gloss gel as well as a iridescent medium on some of the layers. I decided that I loved this panel so much that I was going to hang it up instead of using it on a card. For the next technique, I'll be showing you how to achieve a watercolored look with ink blending, and I'll be using our watercolor swatches stencil set to do so. This stencil is 6 by 9 inches and includes 2 sheets, one with long swatches and one with more blob-like abstract shapes. When inked onto your paper, they give a watercolor and abstract feel. I have a piece of white cardstock here, and I'm going to show you 3 different ways I like to add ink to these swatches to achieve that watercolored look. For the first one, I'm going to be using this long swatch, and I'll be using Picked Raspberry Distress ink. I'm starting by inking up my blending brush here, and when I'm adding the color, I'm concentrating it on one side of the swatch, and once most of that color is deposited there, I'll lightly blend out whatever is left over to the other side of the swatch. And I'll just keep doing this until I achieve that level of color that I want. And when you peel off the stencil, you can see just how cool this looks and how it mimics the look of real watercolors, where the color slowly fades out into clear water. For the second inking technique, I'll be using the other stencil of swatches, and I'll be mixing 2 colors in one swatch. So on the right side, I'll be inking with Mustard Seed Distress ink, and from the left, I will bring in Spun Sugar Distress ink. I'll just bring those colors halfway until they meet in the middle, and then blend them where they overlap. What you get in the end is a swatch that looks like almost there was a little pink left over on your watercolor brush, or like you were trying to create an ombre between 2 colors. For the final inking technique, I'm using this zigzag swatch and placing it on my paper so that it overlaps both of the swatches that I've already inked. Then I'm going to ink up each end of the zigzag in the opposite color from what is already inked underneath. So at the top is the pink swatch, so I'll go in with yellow, and at the bottom is the yellow, so I'll go in with the pink. Overlapping the swatches helps you further create that watercolored look because of the just properties of dye inks, which are transparent, so you can see the layers of ink as they build on top of each other. So right at the bottom of the zigzag here, you can see that because of the dye inks being transparent, you're still able to see that other swatch right underneath, and because the inks are transparent, you'll also see that the colors overlap and create new colors by layering on top of each other, and this just adds more dimension to the background. So I'm going to cover a whole panel utilizing these 3 inking techniques, and I'm starting with yellow here in the top corner in this blob-like swatch. Another way to achieve the ombre look is by starting with a lighter color of ink, like I did with the yellow, and instead of blending that same color out to a lighter color, you can just add a darker shade on one side. So here I used mustard seed over the whole swatch, and then added some fossilized amber for more depth. Here I'm using the 2 shades of pink in one swatch, and then for this next one I'll be blending the 2 different colors in one swatch to create a blended look. I'll show you one more swatch here where I used the dark pink and blended it out to a lighter shade just by changing the pressure of my blending. Also, I've been sure to overlap the swatches as much as possible to create more shades and also to cover as much of the white background as possible. So I'm going to skip to the finished panel here so you can see how fun the finished product ends up looking. In this case, I covered the entire panel with swatches, but you can also just use 1 or 2 swatches to create a focal point on a card for a sentiment or a stamped image, or just to create a fun accent on your card front. This stencil really does have so many possibilities, and I hope that these 3 different inking techniques just help inspire you for how to use it. Here's a card I made using this same color palette. I just added a scallop circle in the center with a sentiment, and for the flowers at the bottom, I just die cut the shadow pieces directly from the background, stamped the flowers on top, and added them back in place using foam tape. I stamped the leaves on another piece of cardstock and added those underneath. Here's a simpler take on this stencil. I just used the stencil that has the long swatches and I inked them in rainbow order onto a piece of watercolor paper. I used watercolor paper because I was using distress inks and I knew I wanted to splatter water over top. Plus the texture of the watercolor paper just adds to the look. I die cut a circle directly from the center of the panel and popped it up with a piece of vellum on top. The sentiment reads, "Be a pop of color in a black and white world," which I thought fit this background perfectly. And again, you can see the green, blue, and purple swatches at the bottom and how they overlap to create just more colors. For my last stenciling technique, I'll be showing you how you can create die cuts from certain stencil designs to use on cards in alternative ways. Here I'm using our layered rainbow stencil set, which is another 6 by 9 inch set with 5 pieces. This stencil layers together to create a radiant rainbow. Again, this stencil features the etchings with numbers corresponding to each layer and etchings for helping with aligning each layer. I'll be starting off with bubblegum here from Hero Arts and adding that color into all of the rays. Then I'll move on to my second layer, which I was able to easily align using those etchings. And for this layer, I'll be using Pale Tomato ink. Then I'm going in with Butter Bar. And then Mint Julep. And finally, Tide Pool. And when you peel off that final stencil, you can see just how fun and colorful this background is, and also how big it ends up being. It will cover a slimline card size, but can also be used for A2 cards as well. So I went ahead and inked another one of these panels, and now I'll be cutting them apart with some scissors. I know it's hard to cut into them, but I think you'll end up liking the finished results, and you don't need to throw away the leftover pieces. You can definitely save those for other cards. So I'm going to be cutting 6 of the rays out and just following the curve with my scissors, and then I'm left with a smaller rainbow die cut piece, and I'll do that for both backgrounds. My idea is to have one of the rainbows coming up from the top and one coming down from the bottom, so I marked the center of my panel with a pencil here so that I knew how far down to glue each one. Then I can lightly adhere the rainbows with some tape runner adhesive and trim off anything that overhangs the panel. I peeled off the rainbows and added them back in place with some foam tape so that I had some dimension on the card. And you can see that here. For an accent, I'm going to be stamping one of the butterflies from our Fluttering By stamp set. I have one of the die cuts here, and I'll use some of the ink colors from the background to stamp all the pieces so that it coordinates perfectly. Then I'm going in with our Script Greetings stamp and die set again, but this time I'm going to use just the die set from my main word, Blessed, and then the To Know You from the stamp set. I cut the shadow layer from vellum so I don't cover up too much of the rainbow, and the Blessed from black cardstock so that there's some contrast. Then I just glued those two together with some liquid glue. I popped my butterfly on top with some more foam tape, and I also popped up the sentiment strip with some foam tape as well. I added a few sequins around the sentiment, and this card was finished. I absolutely love the way that this card turned out, and I hope you like it too, and that you think that cutting the background apart was worth it. This technique would also be super fun to do with the watercolor swatches stencil as well. Here's a few more cards using the layered rainbow stencil set. Here I inked up the rainbow in traditional colors, and I used Fluttering By again, as well as the Script Greetings die set. For this card, I actually utilized the ombre inking technique that I showed you with the watercolor swatches stencil, where I concentrated the ink at the bottom of the rays and lightly blended the color up to the top of the rays. I used some floral images from one of our sets and splattered the background with some gold ink as well. Lastly, here is a scene card I made using an adorable critter image from our line. I inked this one in a fall color palette and added a sentiment, branch, and some leaves for the cute bird to sit on. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed all of the techniques that I shared using our 3 new stencil designs, kaleidoscope, watercolor swatches, and layered rainbow. If you'd like to purchase these stencils or any of the other items shown in today's video, please head over to www.𝐲𝐢𝐭𝐡.com and use code SSE25 at checkout for 25% off. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you later. Bye!